Just gonna be weird footage at the beginning. Anyway, did it start? Yeah, something's happening. Come, pop a squat, my dude. Oh, jeez. I think I'm gonna have to like watch this like a pot because it seems like it's just slowly sinking no matter what I do. Just gonna be a little. It's gonna sink kind of funny, and I'm gonna have to periodically adjust it.
Good times, good times.
Could be worse. Worse things in life.
It's true. It's very true.
Should we roll?
Yeah, let's roll.
You want to take intro duties?
Sure.
You want to take a ditty?
Duty?
You want to take a ditty?
Well, all right, party people. It's right back at you, my boy Luke and myself, Lanson, with another episode of Have You Seen This? And we, yes, very exciting. This is the first Have You Seen This? And I believe the first recording for any sort of underqualified idiocracy associated thing where we've actually done it before a camera.
Where we got a camera, and I'm already so self-conscious.
I know, right? I'm like, jeez.
I'm going to watch this back later and dislike things about myself.
We're learning things about ourselves that we didn't want to.
Well, that's what this show is about. It's about watching movies that teach us things that make us a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I think I learned things from this movie, things that made me uncomfortable.
For sure. And the movie that we are talking about is the movie of the first Underworld in the Underworld series.
Yes.
Yes.
Came out in 2003. I looked that up and then I forgot to write it down. I'm pumping microphones. This is going to be really fun audio.
Oh, yeah.
Wrote that down. And now you see if you look.
20.
You see that?
2003. If you took out the zeros, it'd be 23.
Yeah, it'd be the number 23 with Jim Carrey. It would be it.
I forgot about that
It'd
one.
be a completely different movie. It's great. It's great. Oh, I gotta stop touching stuff. This is so much harder than I thought.
Oh.
What did we get ourselves into?
What is this?
So, right. So I guess first thoughts about the movie, right?
Yeah. So
I've seen this a number of times before. You've seen it. This is your second time?
Second time, yes. Second time. Yeah, it's definitely 2003 comes out very strongly in this movie. It's very much telling of the time in which it was made. So you gotta, I feel like you gotta take that with a bit of grain of salt when you're watching it. But,
I wrote down. Where did I write it down? I wrote down a specific phrase that we said multiple times during the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It was, if I can find it, yes, live forever and dress like the early 2000s.
the millennium has to match their age, I guess. I don't know.
They're apparently very confident.
Yes.
In what they have going for them. This is actually I think I've told you this. This was the first rated R movie I ever saw. I think I was 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
We actually watched the unrated cut, which I had never seen before. So there was some stuff in there where I was like, I don't remember this from when I was 10.
This isn't a 10-year-old's movie, I tell you what.
I mean, it's not a 10-year-old's movie anyway, but I think, I don't know, I was 10 or 11, and all things considered, it's not the worst rated R movie you could start with.
That's true.
There are better.
Yes.
But I also made the comment to you, like, as the movie was starting, I feel like every time I watch this movie, I rewatch this movie, I like it a little bit less.
Yeah.
Like, it's a little bit less cool than I thought it was the last time. And I think that holds up. There's a law of diminishing returns in this
true.
movie. It doesn't hold up well to repeat movies. I think as a writer, I've sort of said a lot that science fiction and fantasy movies, like the difficulty with them is if you spend too much time building the world and then, to have a good science fiction or fantasy story, you have to spend time building a world that complements the story. But then when you actually make the movie or write the book or whatever, you have to focus on the story in order for it to come through clean and come through good. And I think this movie spent so much time building a world and then didn't necessarily focus on the story correctly. Like, there is a story there. If anything, there's too much of a story. I think we found as we watched the movie.
A lot of detail.
Way too much detail. To the point where things happen that are supposed to be like twists. They're supposed to be like major plot twists. But they don't hit very hard because there's just so much information coming at you anyway. You're like, oh, this is just more information. So, one weakness in the movie. Should we go through? Should we break it down? Should we talk about the movie? So we have the opening monologue. There's so much voiceover work in this movie, and not to the movie's benefit, I think.
It doesn't always work, you know.
I mean, I guess like if they stuck with one character, maybe
that makes sense, yeah.
But they love bouncing back and forth between like lots of different characters.
Everybody gets a chance.
There's like a crazy. You said he looked like a Nazi scientist, and that's sort of what he was in the context of the movie.
He's like doing all these weird experiments, and he's got this very typical German accent. I'm like, what are we going after here, people?
Literally in the first scene, there's just this hilarious like close up of him like mopping his brow, like he has to prove that he's a stressed out scientist. Like, it's important that we know he's working hard on whatever it is he's working on. And even he gets a voiceover at one point. So it's kind of like, what makes it special that to open the movie, Kate Beckinsale's character Celine, why is it special that she has a voiceover at the beginning if everybody gets one at some point?
It really does cheapen it.
Another thing we said right off the bat. Is the actors in this movie, they're really good actors. And some of them are actually giving, like, pretty good performances.
For sure.
I think everybody's definitely giving their all. I think each person's all is just maybe falls short of other people's alls in the same movie. But no, so I wrote down, it starts with the line, like, the war ground to a halt. And then as they go on to explain what's happening, there isn't a war. Like, the vampires won.
Yeah.
At this point, they're just hunting werewolves. It's not a war if you're hunting.
Right.
Like, I don't say I'm at war with deer. Like, if I go deer hunting, I'm not like, I'm at war with those quick little
kill my family. I'm coming after them. Every one of them.
I gotta get them.
Not just the women, but the children. I slaughtered them like animals. Because that's what they were.
So just like right out off the bat, it's this insane premise of like we're at war with the werewolves. Except really in all technicalities, we've won. We're just hunting them down at this point, like almost for sport. Because she even says like. Right at the beginning, she, like, the end of her, like, opening voiceover, she says something to the effect of, like, soon my job will be necessary, and that's a shame because I love doing it. And it's like, yeah, you're hunting for sport. That you basically just admitted that. She also, so she calls herself a death dealer.
Yeah.
In the opening voiceover. In previous viewings of this movie, I assumed that was a clan of vampire, because she says that there's 2 clans of vampire that are, like, big deals, or whatever.
Right.
I had assumed that Death Dealer was one of the clans. I'm now realizing that may just be a term for somebody whose job it is to hunt werewolves.
We gotta deal some death, you a death dealer.
You got death. You deal with the death.
I wonder, do they try out for that? Is it just a sign-up thing? I don't know.
Somehow you get good at it, though. And she's, like, the best. And she's clearly the best because, like, 10 minutes into the movie, she's the only one left.
I know, right?
Can you move the mic a little closer to you?
There we go.
Let's do that.
There we go.
I want to make sure dulcet tones of Lanson Labin make it through.
Oh, yeah.
And also, like, every time we do a movie, now that there's a visual representation, these are my notes, right? And Lanson's showing your notes.
Hey-yo.
Every movie is like this. And I'm just so... keep bumping stuff.
It's probably because halfway through I'm like, oh yeah, we're taking notes.
Well, and I always reach a point, too, where I trail off. I think about a half hour before the end, I just stopped taking notes. Yeah, my last note I took was during the during like the attack sequence, I guess.
I think so. The fight thing.
Just because they said one of the guys' names, and I'm like, oh, I didn't write down his name. I'm gonna write down his name. Oh man. Right. So there's this insane opening voiceover that tells us everything and yet nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing we have is a full-on shootout. And by the way, like, how the shootout starts, and you called this out. You were like, or we talked about it or something, where it's like, every important character in this movie, like, can't be snuck up on.
It's true.
Like, somebody could be coming up behind them, totally silent, like, they're totally should be able to sneak up on them, and the person will somehow just instinctively know that there's somebody there.
Somebody's behind me.
So it opens with Reyes, played by one of the like story writers and producers of the movie, Kevin Griot, I think his name was, who has the most insane voice I've ever heard in my life.
I know, right?
I looked it up too. That's his real voice. They didn't use any effects on his voice. That's just how he sounds.
That is a deep voice.
It sounds like a voice modulator.
It really does.
It does not sound like a real voice. It's insane. But anyway, so like the Death Dealers are trying to sneak up on homeboy Reyes, and he somehow instinctively knows they're there, and he yells, "Blood!" And they start shooting up the subway. And I'm like, does this movie start with a gang shootout? Is that how this movie starts? But no, it's like, it's the ultimate gang shootout, I guess, between vampires and werewolves.
I guess.
But it literally starts with this insane sequence of just a shootout in broad daylight where civilians get like winged in the shoulder casually.
I know, like one of the werewolves shoots this lady in the shoulder and just keeps going. He's like, I don't even care, bro.
And by the way, when she gets shot, I don't know what a person would do when they get shot. But when this lady gets shot, she looks like she goes into a seizure. Like she's like her body just is like vibrating almost. We don't want to get too hung up on the details. We don't want this episode to be forever long.
Right.
But and another thing too is like this movie falls short in an interesting aspect, which is every character is cool, therefore none of the characters are cool.
That's true.
You know what I mean? Like one of the Death Dealers, like at the very beginning shootout that they make a big deal of, we learn later his name is Nathaniel.
Right.
He's treated like he's the coolest dude on the planet, and he is killed with ease in this shootout. So like the shootout like spills out into like the subway tunnels. The werewolves turn into werewolves because I guess they can just do that whenever they want.
Yeah. Moon isn't a factor anymore.
Yeah, and there's this guy Nathaniel who like they put a lot of camera emphasis on, and they've treated him like he's a really big deal. And he, as soon as a werewolf character transforms, he's killed.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Yeah, exactly.
Out the door.
You only learn his name later because Celine like mentions it. She's like, Nathaniel's out there, and it's like, no, he's not.
No,
he's definitely not.
He got murked.
So it's just this insane thing. We talk a lot about like point of view shots, like especially in the Halloween episode, we talked a lot about point of view shots. This movie is full of point of view shots from a werewolf like running at a vampire.
Yeah.
There's a weird thing where it's like the movie like 5 minutes in shows you a werewolf transformation, but then they never really want to show you the werewolf. Like it's treated like it's supposed to be like a big reveal at some point in the movie, but the big reveal never happens. Where you only see like glimpses of like a claw and like a chest and like a snout. You never really get like a good like full-on view of the werewolf. And it almost feels like there's going to be a big reveal at some point, and then there just never is.
Right.
That being said, like what you see is pretty cool effects-wise. Like there's really cool practical effects at work. Do you want to take over narrating the movie? I have too many notes. It's going to be too detailed.
No, you're good.
Let's go through.
Yeah, no. So we find ourselves in that gang shooting, and then you have the werewolves transforming into werewolves, and they're after this human is kind of the setting of what's going on. Is they're after this one Michael is the name of the guy that they're after,
and it's very clear to the audience that Michael is involved. But like the vampires only sort of like half notice him, I guess. There's a weird moment between Michael and Celine that I guess is supposed to be like the seed of their eventual romance.
Sure.
But like, other than that, like they barely even notice that he's there.
I know. And I mean, like, obviously it's two planted seed of romance, but I feel like the stare that they share is like uncomfortably long. Like if I made eye contact with somebody,
I would never make eye contact like that on public transport.
I know, it's just like that'd be weird.
That's just dangerous to see somebody on public transport and just
I mean,
prolonged eye contact like that is insane.
Are you my son?
Dad?
But I mean, I guess I've never held eye contact with Scott Speedman, so like
that's
that might
true.
be different.
That's true. And by the way, like talking about like some actors don't do well in this movie, we are not talking about like Kate Beckinsale and Scott Speedman are like the leads of the movie, the unequivocal leads. We are definitely not talking about them. As a matter of fact, I think there's only one performance in the movie I don't like. I think the guy playing Craven is the only guy where I feel like his performance just isn't good. I feel like everybody else is actually giving a really good performance.
Right.
Down to Sophia Mills is like the jealous girl in the coven. Erica. We loved Erica. We were actively rooting for Erica like every step of the way. Like everything she did, we were like, yeah,
Erica, go.
Oh shoot! So so there's a whole thing. She kind of like follows him down in the sewers. She thinks there's like a bunch of werewolves hiding down there.
Yeah, she hears like a bunch of commotion, and she's like, werewolves.
Yeah. Although we do see what it is, and it's werewolves like beating each other to the death.
It's Werewolf Fight Club.
Yeah, it's Werewolf Fight Club. And that's when Michael Sheen enters. Again, going back to like they just give us two information, so none of the plot twists are cool.
Mm-hmm.
They introduce Michael Sheen probably 20 minutes into the movie, and then later we're supposed to be surprised by him. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like later they're like, Lucian is still alive, and it's like, yeah, well we saw it.
Like, we know this.
Yeah, like that's not a plot twist. Like we've known about it since like maybe 20 minutes into the movie. Probably not even that. It was probably more like 10 or 15 minutes.
Yeah.
But he walks in and he has this like awesome thing, and I literally like as soon as he walked on screen, I wrote down Michael Sheen is great.
Michael Sheen is great.
He's awesome.
Shout out to that guy.
Yeah, for real though. And then, right, so then they go back to like the vampire house.
Vampire house.
And it seems like the Death Dealer is like the Death Dealer moniker is like a very select group of very cool vampires, and the rest of the vampires apparently just kind of lounge around.
Yeah.
Like they don't even have TV.
Like they just gotta be sexy and lounge and just chill, man. Don't worry about it.
There are like 3 different shots that I thought were all the same shot of Kate Beckinsale walking through the front door and like lounging vampires just like looking at her like, what?
I think they might have changed costume, and I think that's the only difference.
Other than that, it seems like it's the exact same shot. And again, like talking about like the attire. These vampires are very into the 21st century.
Oh yeah.
Like Craven, who's sort of like the head vampire of the house. He's like in charge. The most annoying character in the movie by far. He wears like silk shirts.
Yeah, like almost transparent silk. You're like, you might as well just go with a full fishnet shirt at that point, dude.
And like the aesthetic too. I mean, Kate Beckinsale is in a full leather costume the entire movie.
I know she's got a
except for the random scene where she's like just out of the shower or something, speaking to herself in the mirror.
Yes, yes.
Which is
very
important. Which is an important scene? Question mark.
For the viewers at home. I mean,
it seemed important to the director. I don't know that it was important to anyone.
It sets up so much context. We need this. We need this so badly.
And we were a little confused too about timelines and things because Kate Beckinsale was married both to Michael Sheen and to the director, not at the same time. She has been married to both the director Len Wiseman and Michael Sheen, who of course we said featured in the movie. We couldn't figure out the timeline of it exactly. I found it on the internet. She and Michael Sheen were together, and they split during the they split like just before the production of this movie or during the production of this movie, and then working with the director on this movie and the sequel is when Kate Beckinsale and the director got together.
Okay.
So it makes that scene like so much weirder. This weird shower scene of Kate Beckinsale that you know the director was like, we need this, Kate. We need this. It makes it so much weirder to know that he was like hardcore crushing on her.
Oh, wife, that woman.
The whole time he's filming this shower scene, just like, oh yeah,
this is great.
I gotta.
By the way, I love this. I guess this is kind of like the whole charade. If you want to do a movie and make sure that convey that it's a movie that you're doing.
So the director was very much intending to put a ring on it.
Oh, sure.
Man, we just kind of like gotta jump forward. There's a bunch of stuff in the Vampire Coven that isn't really. That's more politics than anything. Like they talk about the Lycans stole weapons. Actually, let's backtrack a little. Because we're shocked that this is happening in public. Because the existence of werewolves and vampires seems to be a secret.
Right,
like nobody seems to know about it, and they make a point of saying that they're secret.
Yeah.
But the movie opens with them doing a shootout in full view of the public.
Yep.
And then on top of that all, they state that the weapons the Lycans are using to kill vampires must have been developed by the military, which means the military must be aware of vampires.
So the government knows what's going on.
Exactly. So it's like, where is the secret? They insist that they are a secret, but they don't seem to be a well-kept secret in the slightest.
Not really.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So, okay. I mentioned that. I can cross that off my list. I wrote that down. Why are vampires in every movie always rich, by the way?
You know, I guess. Yeah, I don't understand.
They just automatically assume that immortality means rich.
That's true. I mean, I don't think anybody would watch a vampire movie about some guy that's just scrounging for like ramen blood. He's just getting some homeless dude and being like, "All right, come down to my apartment."
Don't want a vampire movie where the vampire has a day job.
Well, that
works the night shift.
Is that gonna be all for you?
But yeah, it's just funny because it's like that seems to be like a plot point of like a lot of vampire movies.
Yeah.
Like they even made that, what was it, like Vampire Academy, that was like a teen vampire movie.
Oh yeah.
And even in that, they made a point of saying that all vampires are rich because they go to the super private and elite academy.
There you go.
So I don't know. Vampires are always rich in movies. That's how it works, guys.
Werewolves, get your crap together. You gotta start forming something. Get some infrastructure.
All right. Now my notes are just me writing down characters' names because we meet a lot of characters very quickly.
It's a revolving door, it seems like.
Yeah, for real. So I guess like the important names we meet is we meet Craven, who's running the house, and we hear the name Victor. We haven't met him yet, but we know that Victor is in charge and Craven is just running the house while Victor is away. There's Erica, who very much like wants to be Craven's bride, but Craven has like this obsessive crush on Celine that ends up being way more important to the plot than I care for it to be.
Right. Yeah.
And you just have, Erica, who, like I said, we were like actively rooting for. Like we were really hoping she'd have a turnaround moment where she's like, Craven's the worst.
I just
need to love myself. Like we were actively rooting for that.
Do it.
We loved Erica so much. And Sophia Mills, like terrific performance.
Hold on.
I don't know what the deal with Craven is, but he's just chewing up every scene and it is not working.
Yeah.
Like it looks like he's putting everything into every second of the movie and it still doesn't work. Like there's a scene where him and Celine are having a quiet conversation and he gets so upset that he drools. Like he spits and then drool just like runs down his chin for like the rest of the scene and it's like, dude, come on, man. Like you're just having a conversation. You need to bring it down a notch. So subtlety would have gone a long way. Oh yeah, and in case you didn't know Craven had a thing for Celine, there's literally, so they figure out that the werewolves are chasing Michael because they see a picture of them following Michael. And Erica looks at Michael and says, "Oh, he's attractive for a human." And of course, that's when Craven, who's attractive, like,
are you guys talking about me?
With his indeterminate accent.
I know, we couldn't figure out like what he's going for.
We think he was playing American, but he's not actually American. That's probably what happened.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, if you're learning English as a second language, that's a hard thing. But like, wherever you're from, just go with that. Just don't worry about it.
Yeah. You know? And the movie comes across like it wants to be multicultural.
For sure.
Even though there's only 2 black characters. It comes across like it wants to be multicultural.
Yeah.
But then to have like some characters be British, some characters be American, and then it's kind of seeming like no in between. It's like the dude could have just used a regular accent. It would have been fine.
Right.
Like somebody's gonna look this up and be like, "That guy's American," and we're gonna look like idiots. But
Well, he's gonna look like an idiot. What was that cultural appropriation crap you're doing, Count Transylvania?
says more about him than it says about us. Oh man. Okay. So Craven's jealous. And Celine's like, we got to go after this guy. We have to figure out why the werewolves want him. And because he's jealous, he's like, no, don't do that. Well, I guess we figure out later that there's ulterior motives. So, spoiler alert. Craven is in fact working with the werewolves. Although it's not much of a business relationship, to be honest. I'm not entirely sure like why he cares.
Right.
It's based in nothing, and nothing comes of it, really. But yeah, so like he's like, hey, yeah, don't worry about that guy, leave him alone. And she ignores him, and she goes to find him. And then there's so many sequences in this movie where we see werewolves run on the wall.
Yeah.
And I don't fully understand what that's about. Like, it's supposed to be scary that they defy gravity. I'd rather have them like down on all fours.
Just going after it.
Yeah, just going after it. Up on the wall just seems excessive.
Yeah, and it's not that like there's not room to run on the floor. Like there'll be three, and all three of them are like picking a wall.
Yeah,
it's like can't just one of us go down the middle?
There's nobody on the floor. By the way.
I know, right?
Not a single werewolf on the floor. They're all on the walls for no reason. Like Spider-Manning for some reason.
Spider-Man.
So I don't. There's a whole very confusing sequence where she gets to his house. She like chokes him out and is like, "Why are they after you?" And he clearly has no idea what she's talking about. And then the werewolves bust in. He uses the confusion to like escape from her for a moment.
Yeah.
And she is being chased by werewolves who run on the wall. And she decided the only way for her to get out of there is to shoot the floor in a circle so that the floor collapses beneath her and she's now a level below where she was, which there's so many reasons that doesn't work.
Right.
And it's so hilariously like bad. But that's the thing about this movie is it doesn't really feel like a story or like a movie. It feels like they had ideas for sequences and then they needed an excuse to slap them together. And also, there is an elaborate backstory. Like, the movie is more about things that happened in the past than things happening in the present.
Yeah.
Like, they're just constantly talking about, like, things that happened in this history of the vampires. Which is, again, going back to this idea that sometimes, like, if you're too focused on the world, the story suffers, and the story is what the audience needs to be in on.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. I knew this was going to sink lower and lower while we were doing this. Right back down. Didn't change anything.
So defiant. Just like that Lucian.
That Lucian.
Which is another thing. Like, I know it's a small thing, but like in Lucian, I'm like, you got the hard C and the soft C. I'm like,
oh, I thought you were going to bring up the fact that no two characters say the name.
That's true.
Pronounce the name the same way.
No, it's true.
Some people call him Lucian. Some people call him Lucian. Like it's like it's a small thing, but it's like you could have consistency.
I know.
Like,
just like
he's an important part of the movie. You say his name a lot.
I know. Just Lucian or whatever. Like, just pick one.
Yeah, and it's not like it's not determined by one or the other too. Like if it was like the English accent always said Lucian and the American accent always said Lucian, I guess I could forgive it.
Sure.
But it's not consistent in that way.
Yeah.
Like it's just anybody can say anything. Some characters use both. I think Michael Sheen uses both. I think at one point he calls himself Lucian, and then at another point he calls himself Lucian.
Cool. I just reinvented the brand.
Michael Sheen can do whatever he wants.
He can.
So yeah, so she shoots through the floor,
Yep.
but she's too late because Michael Sheen intercepts Scott Speedman.
Mhm.
Scott Speedman plays Michael. Michael Sheen plays Lucian. So we're all clear. Lucian, however you want to say it. So yeah, Lucian like shows up and bites Michael so he'll be a werewolf.
Yes.
And which we learn later is like a part of a big elaborate plan.
Yeah, he's also trying to get his blood as well.
Yes, he wants some of his blood. And that basically concludes that sequence. There's like a car chase scene type thing, which we laughed out loud at because there's a moment. I actually wrote this down. It was so funny. Like, in this movie, you can tell when Celine is hurt because Kate Beckinsale makes the acting choice to just blink a lot. Like, anytime she's supposed to be injured, she's just like... That's supposed to be like, oh, I'm weak. And so she's driving the car, blinking a lot, and Scott Speedman is like, pull over, you're going to kill us. And she says, I'll be fine. And then immediately passes out. Which was like a comedy beat. It was so funny.
I know.
Oh, man. Okay, yeah, and then I didn't write anything down for a good long while.
Lots of
I don't know. There's a mansion scene where they kind of ogle over Michael. It makes Craven and Celine fight more.
Mm-hmm.
And then Erica, like, scares Michael, so he jumps out the window and runs away. And that's sort of just, that's that for a minute.
Yep.
Celine does begin to suspect, because famously... Craven has told everybody that he killed Lucian.
Mm-hmm.
And she begins to suspect that she saw Lucian. She didn't know it was him. She's, like, never met him before. But she saw him, like, when he bit Michael. So she starts to suspect that he is Lucian and that he's really alive.
Yep.
So there's an intense book reading session. This montage of her reading books.
Vampire books.
With great sound design. And ultimately decides that, like, there is insufficient proof that Lucian is dead and he is probably alive and Craven is probably a liar. Which is all true.
Yeah.
And that leads to Craven going to confront Lucian. And the funniest line we agreed in the whole movie, where he says, "Don't force me to regret our arrangement." Which isn't even a threat.
Not really.
Literally what he's saying is, you're making me feel things.
I don't want to feel bad about my choices.
I don't want to feel bad about my choices. I think I did the right thing, and you're forcing me to regret it. That's essentially what he's saying in the scene.
Yeah.
And it's supposed to be this, like, dramatic moment of, and he says it like it's a threat, and it's not.
It's really not.
It's really not.
It's a paper tiger.
Oh my gosh. Right. Okay, and then we have the weird shower sequence we alluded to earlier.
Yes. Very uncomfortable.
It was an artistic choice, the director says.
Sure. Allegedly.
I feel like it was just an excuse because basically Kate Beckinsale has two outfits in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
She's wearing leather or she's naked. And the shower scene was like, it was just the director taking advantage of the second of those two outfits. Like, you don't see anything. It's all steamy and it's all, like, below frame.
Yeah.
And that makes it worse because it's like there is no reason for this scene to be happening. And basically, it's, again, like, we laughed out loud at it. What happens in the scene is she writes the name Victor in the mirror, who we know is important.
Victor with a K.
Victor with a K.
Yeah.
She writes it in the mirror, and then she swipes it away, and she goes, "Please forgive me." And that's like... And it's like, wow, I'm really glad we had this gratuitous scene of Kate Beckinsale.
This daddy issue mixed with, like, a Bloody Mary type of ambiance.
Like, Victor, and then Bill Nye. Hello. So, from all this, we're supposed to gather that she's made some sort of decision regarding Victor. Yeah. And that's when she goes to, like, this super creepy crypt room, opens up a tomb, and Victor's inside. And then there's, like, this weird mouthpiece. Which,
it's like basically a funnel.
Yeah, there's this weird mouthpiece that's a funnel for her to pour blood into to, like, wake him up, I guess. Because, like, he needs blood to, like, get his system going again because he's been asleep for a while.
You just gotta press the power button.
But as soon as you saw that mouthpiece, like, what was it you said? You were like, what is he going to play harmonica? Like, what?
Time to shred on that harmonica, Victor.
And it was just so... And then there's this hilariously awful CGI sequence that's supposed to be his organs, like, restarting.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, if vampires are supposed to be in, like, a state of alive but not alive, why is there an elaborate scene of their organs restarting?
That's true.
Like that made no sense to me.
Yeah.
Goodness. And of course, Bill Nighy plays Victor, and again, just an incredible performance. This movie is stacked with incredible actors giving really good performances, just with the worst material.
Yeah, I know. There's not. I mean, it's like giving a Nerf football to Joe Montana and saying, "Oh, like, all right, go win the Super Bowl."
And the funny thing too is like Bill Nighy is even finding ways to act when he doesn't have lines because he keeps making these like distinct like mouth noises of like
yeah.
And in the hands of a lesser actor, it would be the worst thing ever. But Bill Nighy doing it, you're like, oh, this guy's good.
He knows.
This guy, he knows the way, dude. So yeah, and then again, like I stopped taking notes. So. Weird stuff has been happening to Scott Speedman, Michael, because he's turning into a werewolf now, but he doesn't realize that.
Yep.
Oh, also, there's a thing in this movie where, like, biting and, like, drinking blood and any sort, like, exchanging any sort of bodily fluid or something apparently leads to you, like, seeing that person's memories.
I don't know.
Because that's why she puts her blood in the weird harmonica mouthpiece for Bill Nighy, is to give him memories so he'll wake up and be like, oh, something's fishy.
Yeah. I know.
And then Lucian biting Michael. Michael starts to see Lucian's memories.
His life, basically, yeah.
And he goes to his friend, his sort of friend, Wentworth Miller. And then Wentworth Miller is sort of treated like an antagonist because he goes to get the cops, but it's the weirdest thing in the world because he goes to get the cops after Michael shows up at the hospital, like physically threatens him, admits to being involved in a shootout in the subway.
Yeah.
And then talks about a guy biting him, and they get in they get in this classic like werewolf line where he's like, "I was bitten by a man," and he goes, "You sure you weren't bitten by a dog?"
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry.
Do you know what that means?
That golden retriever sure looked like Hank.
That fun like wink to the audience of like, it's a werewolf.
In case you didn't know.
In case you didn't know. And then Wentworth Miller, who's awesome. Love him. He hasn't broken out of prison yet. This is breaking out of prison.
He has not been convicted, and he's not going to prison quite yet.
But he's treated like the bad guy in this circumstance because he goes to get the cops after Michael freaks out and physically like threatens him.
Yeah. To
the point where he like grabs a hold of him and is like holding him like way too tight, and he has to say, "Please let go."
I know.
Needlessly. So yeah, Michael's freaking out. He goes back to the mansion of the vampires because he wants answers.
Yes.
So Celine takes him for a drive. And this movie, one thing I will say is it's like, so you know how like in Law and Order, every time they like talk to a person, that person's always like unloading crates or like, or you know, like mopping a counter. Yeah. They're wiping a counter.
Right.
Not mopping floor. They're always doing something. It's because the directors say, like, because those speeches are so exposition heavy, you know, he went here, he did this, he would hang out with so-and-so. There's so much exposition, you have to have them doing something exciting visually to offset the boringness of an exposition dump.
Mm-hmm.
This movie really took that to heart, that idea, because this driving sequence, basically nothing happens. They drive from the mansion to another location, but it's just this huge exposition dump.
Yeah, in a Maserati.
Yeah. But that's kind of this movie in a nutshell. In that there's a lot of exposition, a lot of stylization, and not really room for anything else.
Yeah.
We also get like vague exposition because they arrive at this place, which she says is a place they use to torture werewolves, and she kind of casually mentions that they own some kind of medical pharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
And that they've invented a way to clone blood so they don't have to feed off humans anymore. And it's really like barely talked about.
Yeah.
Like he's like, "What is this? Biotech Industries?" And she goes, "Yeah, we own it." And that's like the whole conversation.
We're rich. What does it matter?
Yeah, again, like just vampires are rich.
How did you guys figure out all this stuff? We just read a lot. We had a lot of vampire books about anatomy.
And like getting even crazier, right? They have this like really heartfelt scene in this like torture chamber where she's telling him about becoming a vampire. This like tear jerking story that means a lot later in the movie, but again, you're hit with so much information that the plot twist that hits later in the movie just doesn't hit.
Yeah.
But yeah, this long speech about how her entire family was killed by werewolves in a vicious attack. And it's just the most like bonkers thing because like it's so clearly not the werewolves that did it.
Right.
Like even as she's saying the story, you're like, no, this doesn't add up.
I don't think so.
I know, and he's like, who started the war? And she's like, well, the vampires say that the werewolves started it. And he's like, oh, okay, well, but who for sure started it? And she goes, I don't know. We're not allowed to learn about the history of it. We're not allowed to read books. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this is such clear like brainwashing. Like it's so obvious that she should have figured this out probably years ago.
I know, it's only now that you're having second thoughts about this whole war
It's
thing.
only now when some human that looks like Scott Speedman shows up and is like, wait a minute, but it sounds like you're being manipulated.
I've got a fresh set of werewolf eyes.
So this clear manipulation that she's unable to see for some reason.
Sure.
And then he shares a backstory about how his girlfriend died. It's a really weird and detailed story.
Yeah.
That is like a really solid performance from Scott Speedman.
It is.
And actually does a lot to explain his character, but it's still just like a really weird and dark like moment.
In a torture room.
Well, I mean, the movie as a whole kind of has like, it has the levity of like, oh, but this is all fiction, to be offset by this horrible realistic story about him having to watch his girlfriend die is a really weird moment in the movie.
Yep.
To like, forget all of the action, forget all of the fantastic elements. We're going to tell a disturbingly real story.
Yeah.
Just randomly in the middle. Oh, gosh, yeah. So, yeah, what did I write down? Exposition while driving, Zyotech Industries, we own it. Celine's backstory is bonkers, that's what I wrote down. Basically, all her backstory does is it gives her a reason to hate Lycans without ever questioning anything.
Yeah.
Michael does say at one point during his like speech, though, about watching his girlfriend die, he's like, after that I had to get away, so I moved here. The movie is not at all clear on where here is.
Right.
I mean, it's clearly not America. We know that much basically from Michael's speech because he's clearly American.
Yes.
And the way he concludes it, it makes it obvious that he is no longer living in America. But it's never really clear where the movie is. Like, it was filmed in Hungary, we looked up, so I guess the movie's just supposed to be in Hungary?
But it's funny because, like, you never meet anybody that's, like, actually Hungarian or, like, Hungarian.
Like, the only human characters we meet are Michael and Wentworth Miller's character, who he has a name, but I've already forgotten it.
Yeah.
And they're both American.
Yeah.
So, and everybody else is American or British, but everybody else is also a werewolf or a vampire, so it doesn't matter, like, what their cultural background is. Really, they could be anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, the people who inhabit, like, this world all seem to be American, but it's indicated that the story does not take place in America.
Little America in Hungary. I don't know. Little Commonwealth.
The one part of Hungary where all the Americans live. So that was weird. And then, of course, while all of this is going on, she's run off with Michael. Erica uses the opportunity to get in good with Craven. And it turns out the unrated cut of this movie has a sex scene that I've never seen before between Erica and Craven, which is very laughable.
Oh, yeah.
Just because because it's a serious scene where he like brings her in and he's going to bring her into his confidence.
Yeah.
And it seems like he's going to admit that Lucian is alive, but before he can say anything, she goes, "It can wait," and she just takes off her shirt.
I know. It's like, oh, all right, get into business.
And again, like, you don't see anything. It's all off screen, or there's like a well-positioned bowl at the end of the
book,
scene. Yeah. At the end of the scene, that was the funniest part, is that she like flops over on the couch, and there's a bowl on the table in the foreground that like perfectly covers up like the chest area.
Yeah.
Which was just hilarious to me. On the other hand, like, props to them for. I'm assuming that was the result of them really giving Sophia Mills like really communicating with her and saying like, we don't want to show more than you're willing to show.
Sure.
But at the same time, there was no reason for that scene to have happened.
It really does nothing for the story.
So, yeah. So, like, saying good for them for respecting Sophia Mills is counterproductive because they made her do it in the first place.
I know,
anyway.
right? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let you choose how you're going to do it.
Yeah.
You're going to do it.
It's early 2000s degradation.
Oh, for sure.
Like, you get a say in the matter, but this needs to happen. I don't know why I'm making the director and producer sound like that. Especially because we know one of the producers definitely was like...
I know, right?
But anyway, it was a very unnecessary scene. Only exists in the unrated cut.
Yeah.
And frankly, doesn't need to exist at all.
Not really.
Didn't take away our love for Erica,
No.
but it was like an unfortunate situation for for Sophia Mills. Just early 2000s degradation is all over her and Kate Beckinsale, the only female characters in this movie.
Yeah.
So that was terrible. I wrote down something. I'm not gonna say it out loud because it's a private joke between Lanson and I, but I wanted to see it. Right, yeah. Oh, okay, so yeah, I wrote it down. He's like, well, do you know for sure who started the war? And she says, digging into the past is forbidden. And then they kiss. That's the scene. I'm talking about Celine and Michael.
Yes.
It cuts back to them during that weird... So the weird sex scene starts with Craven and Erica, and then it cuts back to Michael and Celine, I guess, to, like, juxtapose? I don't know. And they finish their weird conversation about how she's being manipulated, and then they kiss. And then she, like, locks him in the torture chamber, and she gives him a gun, and she says, the silver will keep you from transforming into a werewolf. So when the full moon happens tomorrow night, she says tomorrow night. So when the full moon happens tomorrow night, you want to do yourself a favor and you want to shoot yourself with a silver bullet so you won't transform. Instead, he tries to shoot the chain and break it. He tries to shoot the chain and break it, which led to my favorite thing you said the whole night, which was when he, like, lifts up the gun and then, like, starts taking it, like, moving it towards the chain. You went, is he going to pick the lock with the gun?
I know, I'm like, what are you going to do with that, boy?
It was so funny. Oh, right, and then again... Okay, so she goes back to the mansion. I don't remember what happens. It's obviously not important.
Something, jealousy. And
she probably talks to Bill Nye, and that's all that happens. Yeah. She comes back for Michael. And at that point, we have another situation where they're in the torture chamber. Werewolves are coming up to, like, shoot through the wall and kill them. Mm-hmm. And somehow, out of instinct, she knows they're there, and she shoots them through the wall perfectly. So every single one of them except one is dead. And the one that's left alive is the weird, like, Nazi scientist guy.
Operation Paperclip Werewolf Edition.
Yeah, like... and then Michael jumps out the window.
Yep. Again.
In all the gunfire, and we see he now has werewolf powers because he lands gracefully without harm. Yeah. And then he gets intercepted by these two police officers that we know are werewolves, which leads to an insane sequence that exists for no reason.
Because it's the early 2000s.
Yeah, where he starts transforming in the backseat, and the cops are just, like, pretending it isn't happening.
Oh, it's not happening. It's fine.
Literally, like, he says, like, hey, we have this, like, drug that will stop him from transforming. Should we give it to him? And the other guy goes, no, he'll make it. And then, like, they hear the transformation start, and instead of giving it to him then, they just play music really loud.
Yeah.
And then finally they pull over, and they give him the drug. So the whole scene, you're like, oh, they're, like, ignoring the signs he's going to transform and he's going to escape. No, they still ultimately drug him, but there's just a weird sequence of them playing heavy metal music. Playing nu metal. It's not heavy metal. It's almost definitely nu metal.
Yep.
Playing nu metal music while he's, like, starting to transform in the backseat. That's all that happens in that scene. It exists for no reason.
It's pointless.
Meanwhile, Celine takes German scientist guy to Bill Nighy, to Victor, now that he's woken up.
Mm-hmm.
Right, no, that's what happens. She goes back to the mansion, and Bill Nighy doesn't believe her, so she goes to get Michael, ends up with the German scientist guy, and there's, again, like, they know that there's an exposition dump coming, and they have to make it interesting. So they torture the German scientist guy while he exposition dumps, and that's supposed to be what makes it exciting, even though it's just disturbing.
Yeah.
But basically what he admits, not even what he admits, it's again an exposition dump. He says that Marcus, one of the elders, was the son of a man named Alexander Corvinus, who was the first immortal in the world. And immortality came around because there was a weird virus that went through a village. Alexander Corvinus caught it, but instead of killing him, it somehow made him immortal.
Yeah, it was like, the way that he explained it, he was like in a village where there was a plague going on, and he had a certain mutation instead of, yeah, exactly what you're saying, instead of the plague killing him, it like made him stronger
Yeah.
and turned him immortal.
So like the virus is still a part of his bloodline, and he had 3 sons. One of them was Marcus, who is one of the vampire elders. And Marcus was like bitten by a bat as a child or something, they say.
Yeah.
So he became a vampire. He had another son who we are led to believe was the first werewolf, and then he had a third son who was just human.
Just a guy.
Just some guy.
Can you imagine being
Which
that
is,
guy?
yeah, I know. Which sounds like great when Bill Nighy sings it as like the little prophecy song or whatever. But when you actually stop and think about it, it's like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious. just like, all right, this is my son Marcus, the vampire. This is my son, the werewolf, and this is Ted.
Hello. I stacked the hay.
Yeah, I'm a farmer.
I love this.
I'm gonna live a mortal life.
It's not much, but it's honest work. Out here in Transylvania.
Anyway, but they've become convinced that somewhere in the human line of Alexander Corvinus exists like a set of genes and a mutation of the virus that will allow that person to become a hybrid of a werewolf and a vampire, to be both.
Yes.
And they have determined that Michael is that descendant of Corvinus who can be a hybrid. And Bill Nighy, Victor, he freaks out because a mix of the races is unholy or whatever.
Yes.
And he's like, we have to kill Michael. Did I miss anything else from that exposition dump?
Let me think. They're trying to get the blood of an elder vampire.
We can honestly ignore that side plot. It means nothing.
It's so true.
Ultimately, it means nothing.
It's so true.
Again, there's just so much in this movie that's like, that doesn't add up to anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like Lucian has an obsession with mixing the bloodlines, which we find out in the next scene. He and Michael talk, and it's revealed that the war started because Lucian married Sonia, Victor's daughter, and they were going to have a child together, and Victor was so terrified of the races mixing that he killed the child and Sonia and was going to kill Lucian, but Lucian escaped and started a rebellion. Oh, he also casually drops in there that the werewolves were the vampires' slaves.
Yeah, like they guarded them during the daytime.
Yeah. And the weirdest part about that is, like, we were slaves, but I liked the vampires. Like,
I didn't have any harsh feelings.
I didn't have any harsh feelings. As a matter of fact, I married one, and we were going to have a baby, and then the vampires killed her. So now I hate them. So that explains, like, Lucian's obsession with finding Michael and making a hybrid.
Right.
It's almost like Michael is the son he never had to have or something.
Yes.
And then the movie, like, cares 0% about connecting any dots. And the vampires all show up at the werewolf's hideout. And there's just a massive shootout for the rest of the movie.
Yeah.
And again, we go back to the thing of everybody in this movie is cool, so nobody is cool. Where every character you're supposed to believe is hardcore is killed so easily by some other random character. So there's no hierarchy of like, oh, this guy will probably survive this. It's just everybody dies. Every character with a name dies during this massive shootout. In various ways. I guess noteworthy moments. Craven decides to double-cross Lucian for vague reasons that... Actually, no reasons. He never gives a reason.
Not really. He just shoots him because he's a...
Yeah, he just shoots him just because. So Lucian ends up dying because Craven shot him. Craven also shoots Michael on his way out the door. Genuinely. He's like walking out the door, he's like...
For good ultimate simp. Oh yeah, you like that guy? Well, I got a gun and I'm gonna shoot him, and now you'll like me.
That's what the scene seems to be.
Pretty much.
It's just out of pure jealousy. He guns down Michael as he's like running out the door. So then, to save his life, Celine bites Michael, so he will become a hybrid.
Yes.
And then Victor shows up. Oh, right, and right before Craven leaves, he also drops the bombshell. It wasn't really werewolves that killed your family. It was just Victor. He got hungry one night, and he went out and killed your whole family for a laugh.
He got takeout.
Yeah.
Your family.
Including your 6-year-old nieces.
Oh, my gosh.
Which she talks about, like, in the story. It's, like, a really
God.
detailed moment.
Well, it's like, I can't help but laugh at it a little bit, because it is heartbreaking. It is pretty heavy, but, like, every person in her family is my mother, my father, my brother, my nieces.
And the way the scene like plays out is she's like there was a weird noise out in the barn. I went to go check it, and when I came back, my mother was dead. And then I went into the next room, and my brother was dead. And then I went into the next room, and my father, he was dead. And then I went into the next room, my grandmother, she was dead. And then in the next room was my sister, and she was dead. And you're like, oh, she's done. And then she's like, then I ran to my niece's room.
Nieces?
Like, you keep thinking she's done, and then there's another family member, and it makes it almost comedic.
Yep.
Even though it's this awful, like, tragic backstory, it's just, like I said, I wrote down her backstory is bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just a never-ending listing of, like, also another family member. But yeah, the last one she says is she's like, then she went to my niece's room. And then I went to my niece's room. There were 2 of them, twins, 6 years old, and they were dead too. And it was just, like, it was so ridiculous. I couldn't take it seriously. Man, I wish I had, because it should be sad.
I know, right?
But just in the context of like, and then this, and then this, and then this, and then this.
It's funny, we were even like, what next is going to be your dad? And then I found my father. Well,
We even started like predicting, and we were right. So Craven is like, oh, by the way, Victor did that. And then when Victor shows up, he's like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah, it was me. But I made you immortal, so I mean, like...
But I made you immortal, so why are you freaking? Like,
be cool about this.
Yeah, stop being weird about this, Celine. I'm your freaking vampire dad. So Celine's pissed about this, obviously.
For sure.
And also... she's, like, totally in love with Michael now, even though they spent, like, 3 scenes together in this movie. So, like, he's like, don't worry about it. Like, I still love you. You're still my daughter. I just gotta go kill this hybrid. And then there's a fight between him and Michael where we're kind of supposed to believe that Victor's going to win. But I don't know, like, the very beginning of the fight, it's so obvious that Michael is, like, so much more powerful than him that when Victor starts winning, it seems too convenient for the plot.
Well, it's like, to put it in anime terms, it's like if Piccolo was beating up on Goku, he went Super Saiyan, and he's just thrashing Piccolo, and then all of a sudden Piccolo has this one punch knockout that he just lands, and you're like, okay.
It's so evenly it's so clearly and unevenly matched that when Victor starts to win, I guess you're supposed to be like, well, he has more experience, but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You just don't buy it.
You can't be losing like 10 rounds and then just be like, my experience will kick in any moment.
And not to mention, there are literal moments in the fight where Victor looks at Michael, looks away for a second, and when he looks back, Michael is behind him.
Yeah.
And it's like he's moving that fast, and we're expected to believe that Victor's going to turn the tide of the fight.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was dumb. I didn't buy it. But anyway, he finally like gets Michael in like this chokehold, and he's like, say your goodbyes or whatever he
Time
says.
to die.
And Celine grabs the sword that Victor had been wielding earlier to like kill werewolves, and she does this massive like super cool leap all the way across the room, and there's a slice, and then Victor stands up and pulls out 2 more swords out of nowhere, and he stands in a stance like they're going to fight, and then she holds up the sword to reveal there's blood dripping down it, and then his friggin' head splits in half and falls off.
And then he dies.
Then he dies, which, by the way, you could do like a counter of seconds, and he was alive for at least 15 seconds after she sliced his head in half. Because he fully stands up, pulls out the swords, and they stare each other down. And then she shows him the blood on the sword, and he has a moment of like, ruh-roh, and then his head falls off. It was ridiculous how long that went on, and it was kind of funny, to be honest. And I know you're supposed to be like, oh, well, he's like a vampire. Like, it wouldn't kill him instantly. But she sliced his head in half.
I know, and like the way that vampires and werewolves have been dying in this movie thus far, you're like, yeah, that doesn't make sense.
Some vampires and some werewolves are being killed by just their necks being snapped.
I know, yeah, or like a grenade being tossed.
Yeah.
Like blowing up people.
Some vampires just get bit by a werewolf and they die.
Yep.
So, like, him getting his head sliced off, there's no reason for him to live afterwards as long as he does, other than the movie thought it would be cool.
Yeah.
And you know what? That's where the movie ends.
Yeah, Celine and Michael run off together.
Run off together into the sunset.
The interracial couple.
Except they're both white.
I know, right?
Interspecies, because he's a hybrid, she's a vampire.
There you go.
Oh, we skipped over our favorite part of the whole movie. We laughed so hard because Lucian knows to tell her to bite Michael because he sees them kiss. And there's this hilarious moment where like she comes in and like her and Michael kiss, and then there's like this push in on Lucian's face watching them kiss, just this like
a little treat for me before I die.
Just this moment of like and Michael Sheen is killing it still, but it's just the most hilarious like directorial choice to just push in on him like
oh, I have an idea, it's brewing.
And then, when he gets shot, he's just like, bite him. He's the love of your life. Bite him. So, they run off into the sunset together. Mm-hmm. Oh, and then the movie ends with, this weird, ambiguous shot of the German scientist guy is dead on the floor after they, tortured him. And they tortured him in the crypt, where the elders, do their weird burial sleep.
Yeah.
And so his blood drips down into Marcus's tomb, and we see it dripping into his mouth, and we see his eyes open, and that's how the movie ends. Setting up the sequel, Underworld Evolution, which we will be covering genuinely as soon as we can.
Yes.
Right. But that's the movie. We covered everything important, and even some things that weren't important.
Yeah, some goose chases in the movie, I would say.
And you even brought, and we even had moments where it's like, should we talk about that? No.
Nah, just leave it.
In hindsight, it literally doesn't affect anything. Why talk about it?
It's true.
Right. Can you guess what this movie's budget was?
Geez, probably at least $10 million.
Yeah, it looks fairly expensive, and it was fairly expensive. It was a $22 million budget, which isn't huge, but definitely isn't anything to to yawn at.
Yeah.
And one thing we always do is we've talked about some of the negatives of the movie, some of the things that were just ridiculous, we couldn't take seriously. But we should talk about some of the positives, which is visually it is a feast.
It is.
And I think the director is a very visual guy. I think he's proved that in the other movies he's done.
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that visual effects wise, this movie is actually pretty solid.
It is.
There's a couple of early 2000s CGI moments that don't quite gel,
Right.
but for the most part, the special effects in this movie are great. In particular, the visual effects done without CGI, like the physical, actual effects done on set, all hold up really well and look really good.
Yeah, I do like the design of the werewolves, how they have them, how they're kind of like, almost more like a bear rather than a wolf, and kind of like a mixture between a humanoid as well as a wolf. I like that design as well. And I thought, I would agree with you. I think one of the strengths that it has visually is that it kind of brings the aesthetic into a new generation and kind of gives a new perspective. Even though there are some elements of an old world type of feel, it still has like a very 2000s retro kind of look, which I think plays very well into the story.
Yeah, like it's a modern take on werewolves and vampires.
Right.
It's just no longer modern from our perspective.
For sure.
It's only like laughable to us because this was made in 2003, so we're literally 17 years later going like, oh, this is what they thought modern vampires would be like, stuck in the 2000s.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I think there's a lot of strong design choices in the movie. And the action sequences really are well done.
Oh, for sure.
Like I said, this movie feels like it was designed around we want sequences.
Yeah.
They came up with the sequences and they built a movie around it. So the sequences hold up. They do. Even if some of the premises are kind of silly, like shooting through a floor.
Yeah.
So yeah. And again, we said great actors doing a really good job with what they're given. So yeah, budget of $22 million, and that feels about right. It feels right in that sweet spot. Can you guess what the movie made at the box office?
At the box office, $100 million, somewhere around there.
No, dude, you were very generous with that.
Ah.
Yeah, it actually made approximately $52 million.
Okay.
So it made about double its budget, enough that they moved forward with the sequel. They have made 5 movies at this point.
I didn't know they made 5.
They made 5. I told you this earlier.
Oh, I guess I just didn't remember it. Which is me. So yeah, that probably happened.
And should we make the announcement now, or should we wait till the end?
We can make the announcement now.
Let's make the announcement now. So there are 5 movies in this series. I own 4 of them. The third movie is called Rise of the Lycans. It actually is just a recap of everything we learned in this movie.
One scene. They made a movie out of one scene.
Yeah,
it's all recap.
They made a movie out of one scene that happens in this movie. They go back and they tell the story of Lucian and Sonia and her death and the beginning of the war.
Yeah.
They go back and tell that story for some reason. So, excluding that, we are actually doing our first ever franchise. We are going to be watching all of the Underworld movies except for the third one. And we are going to be putting all of these out for free on YouTube as quarantine content. Things for you to consume during the COVID-19 quarantine.
That's right. Wash your hands. Get on that keyboard and type up our videos and start watching, peeps.
We are watching these movies so you don't have to.
Right, exactly.
We are watching these movies so you can watch us talk about them and then decide if you want to watch these movies or not. That is ultimately what's happening right now. Right, so, of course, this was directed by Len Wiseman, cinematographer, although I don't know anybody can really take credit for cinematography. Taking credit for doing cinematography on this movie is sort of like taking credit for putting cheese on a Whopper Jr.
That was me. I did that.
But the cinematographer was Tony Pierce Roberts.
Oh, of course.
It was written by Danny McBride, not that Danny McBride.
Yeah, exactly. I had that same reaction. Like, Danny McBride. Wow, good for you, man.
Well, and for a moment you can believe it because he wrote Halloween.
He did.
He wrote the 2018 Halloween reboot with the director David Gordon Green. But no, it was not that Danny McBride. It is a different Danny McBride who you probably don't know. And then music was by Paul Haslinger. Although really music was just by new metal bands.
Radio.
Yeah, it was by scanning through early 2000s radio. So IMDb has this movie as a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
What would you rate this movie out of 10?
I give it probably 6.5, a little bit lower.
Like I said, this movie rates lower for me every time I watch it. I think after this particular viewing, I would give it a 6.2. It is enjoyable. I don't mind watching it, but yeah, there are moments where my enjoyment is coming out of laughing at the movie as opposed to what the movie wants me to be feeling.
Yeah.
So that being said, last question that we do on the podcast: would you recommend this movie?
I think it depends. I would recommend it if you're just looking for a movie, especially since most of us are going to be home. Just something to be entertained by and something that's kind of, a little bit of a darker underworld, not to make a pun out of that, but an underworld type of a ambiance. I think that really plays into it. So it's a good popcorn movie, but you're not going to have an intrinsic crisis over it.
Yeah, it's very much a popcorn movie. We should, I guess, disclaimer: every entry in the Underworld series is rated R.
Yep.
This one I think is the most mild one they did. We watched the unrated cut, so it's hard for us to judge based off the unrated cut.
Right.
But the actual rated R cut I think has 3 F-bombs, and there are a couple moments of intense action violence. I think the most graphic thing that happens in the movie in terms of gore is when she decapitates Victor.
Yeah.
Other than that, the movie is pretty vanilla. There's just some
blood spurts.
Yeah, blood spurts like you would see on the TV show Supernatural, which I know a lot of you Utah folks out there love. You love that show. So, if you're used to the blood spurts on Supernatural, you can probably deal with the blood spurts in this movie.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you want, a fun popcorn movie that's just a lot of attractive people.
Just vampires and werewolves going after it. There's a love story. There's some intrigue.
Yeah. Like I said, be warned that there's just a ton of information in this movie.
Yeah.
The movie is nonstop throwing information at you. So us walking you through it will help a lot if you watch the movie. Mm-hmm. You can pay attention a little less.
Yeah.
Because you're oh, they said this was
I know I don't know what that's about, yeah.
But that is Underworld. And we will be back. Oh, burps.
I gotta get it.
I try so hard not to burp on mic because it bothers me, but every once in a while.
Yeah, you can.
But we will be back very soon with the second movie in this series. It's called Underworld Evolution. It will be your first time watching it.
Yeah.
It'll probably be my third or fourth time watching it. I enjoy it significantly less than the original, but that's a personal thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we will be back soon with that.
All right. Catch you guys later.
Catch you on the flippy. Oh, jeez. I just had a terrible moment of anxiety where I'm we click and none of that was recorded.